Good morning, good afternoon, and possibly good evening, depending on when you like to watch or listen to your podcast. I am Lance Malden, a.k.a. Eutychus Knockout. This is Eutychus Knockout Audio. Perhaps you like to listen to your podcast sitting down, on a walk, on a run, or maybe you like to sit in your office, volume high, right when the pastor comes in and immediately try to turn it down as fast as you can. Maybe that's like you. Today's topic is joys of pastoral ministry. This is our first podcast with a varying guest, and I'm so excited that I have encouraged my Pastor Dr. Reverend Kenneth McNeill, to be on this one. Thank you for being a part of this podcast.
I'm glad to be a part. Thank you, Lance.
Yeah. And so I'm going to start this podcast off, if I can pull my phone up quick enough. I want to start this morning off with some scripture. Comes from 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 1 through 5. It says, "So I exhort the elders among you, as a fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, as well as a partaker in the glory that is going to be revealed. Shepherd the flock of God that is among you, exercising oversight, not under compulsion, but willing, as God would have you, not for shameful gain, but eagerly, not domineering over those in charge, but being examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the unfading crown of glory. Likewise, you who are younger, be subject to the elders. Clothe yourselves, all of you, with humility toward one another, for God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble." And it's a great way to start this podcast because I have you on here. And so in exhorting elders, I feel very blessed that you've been a part of my life, and I'm just excited that we get to share our joys of ministry with fellow like-minded believers, and a lot of this will probably be seen by our church family, and so I'm excited. Okay, so the first question I have for you is just to share a little bit about who you are, share your upbringing, where you're from. Let's just start with that. Where are you from?
Seagrove, North Carolina.
Which is approximately 20-ish minutes north of here.
Mm-hmm.
So
20 minutes north.
Close proximity.
Mm-hmm.
Your parents are?
Carl and Eula McNeill. My dad's passed on to go be with Jesus in 1995. My mother's still living and doing pretty well.
And what did your dad do?
For many years, my dad worked in textiles, Klopman Mills, when textiles were big in the state of North Carolina. Worked third shift, and Mom would be at home with my brother and I. And then he did some other things and ended up there at Ashbury Concrete for many years and supervised truck drivers and looked after various things, and maintenance on the trucks. Then eventually in 1983 went into business for himself, he and my brother and my mom and my brother's wife, McNeill's Frames, which is still in operation.
Yeah, okay. So how many brothers and sisters do you have?
I'm the middle son. I have an older brother, Gene, and a younger brother, Brent.
Okay, cool.
Mm-hmm.
And I've met Brent.
Right.
I don't think I've met.
Right. Gene primarily runs and
okay.
owns and operates the business, yeah.
Okay.
Gene and I grew up close together. We were like 2 days being a year apart in age.
Oh, okay.
And so my dad would say, we had two before we knew what was causing it.
Mm-hmm.
My dad had a kind of a keen sense of humor. And then my younger brother came on 14 years younger than I.
Wow.
I tell him that's why he turned out so good, because I had to help raise him.
And your mom, Eula, she basically was around the house.
Yeah, well,
Okay.
In the early years she was, preschool years. She and Dad both are really, really hard-working people. My mom's mother, Dora Crisco, died when my mom was about 13. She says she kind of became, or she was 12 or 13, she kind of became the biscuit maker. And her dad, Emmett Rowe Albright, raised 7 children by himself. I think that was certainly formative for my mom and influenced the way she lives life and how she approaches things. But with the 7 kids, they raised tobacco. My grandpa turned pottery, and he worked in textiles. and was just a really hard-working fellow.
Yeah. I think that shows through your whole family, which we'll get to in a minute.
Yeah, there's a strong, deep work ethic on both sides.
Yeah. So talk about Sherry a little bit. When did you meet Sherry, who is your wife?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Sherry, we met when technically I saw her at a ball game. I was thinking, and when you said you were going to ask me about family stuff, I saw Sherry. I must have been about 13, and we had church softball teams. I saw her in the other dugout, and she was keeping records for the other team, and she's, of course, a math whiz anyway. But I remember seeing her and thinking how cute she was. I was about 13, so she would have been about 10 or 11 probably. But then we officially met.
Were you playing ball?
Years later. I was keeping the book, too.
Books.
Believe it
okay.
or not,
All
I'm
right.
terrible with math. But, I was playing, kind of part-time playing, second string stuff, and keeping the book, too. Anyway, so that's the first time I saw her. But then we met at a summer camp. Some years later, I was 15, and she was 12. And my good friend Michael Bean invited me to go to a Christian camp that my wife Sherry's dad was operating for the summer, or had put on a few weeks in the summer. Anyway, we were there together, and I met her there, and was immediately drawn to her. And I could go on, and I got lots and lots of stories. That's part of the dilemma of this podcast is 30 minutes, and I got stories.
Well, we were sharing stories, just about, kind of the hardships. I mean, some of the, like, how deep, like, ministry stories can go and how real it gets, like, really quick. And, so for this one, we're not going to share many of those. We're going to be sharing the joys of ministry.
Yes.
So, Sherry, she works for Modern Woodman now.
Yeah, that's right.
How long she been with Modern Woodman?
She's a financial consultant there with Modern Woodman, and does investments in insurance and all kinds of things, and does income tax work as well. She's real smart, and I've got more degrees, but she's the smart one.
Yeah.
Or the formal degrees. She's got a lot of certifications, but it's interesting looking back at those years in family life, and I think until I was in my probably in when I did the D-Min work in 4 through 2007, I did not realize really fully how much those formative years. I knew they were important, and we call them formative years for a reason, but in your family of origin, I did not quite see as much the depth until, say, 06, 07. We did some stuff at D-Min work at Campbell called Family of Origin Therapy. Well, we really talked a lot about our childhoods and how things were growing up.
Yeah.
The good stuff, the bad stuff, the painful stuff. And even now, after close to 40 years in pastoral ministry, I realize that those formative years impact and have impacted how I do ministry, how I've done ministry, how I do ministry even now.
Yeah.
So, lest we run past that first question too quickly.
Yeah, well, I think I did. I jumped ship right there, but I was going to ask.
That's all right.
You met when you were 15.
Yeah.
Right, and she was 12 or
12.
13. Okay.
Yeah, sure.
And then you got married.
1982, after we had dated about approximately 5 years.
5 years. So how old were you then?
Sherry was 18. I was 21 when we got married.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So her father was a pastor, of course.
You've
Garland
known her
Hall.
for a long time.
I've known Sherry
Wow.
a long time. And she is a key disciple person in my life, no question about it. She influenced me more for Jesus and in Jesus and all these years. And I say Jesus saved my soul, and he did. Hallelujah, praise him. But she saved my life.
Yeah.
And she discipled me, put up with me all these years. And we don't have a perfect relationship. We really do have a good relationship.
And then I know Sherry's dad was also a pastor as well. Yeah.
Reverend Garland Hall, he was a good man, pastor. I know altogether, over 50 years. He was in one church 30 plus years.
Yeah, wow, praise God.
Sherry
That's
could
awesome.
give you the exact details on that.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating is to think it's fascinating to think about how much your childhood years really do influence you for the remainder of your life.
Mm.
I used to hear that. I would kind of run past it, or I read it and I'd run past it and say, okay. But now it's so sobering.
Yeah.
After all these years, I'm 63 now.
Yeah.
I'll be 64 in September. But after all these years now, I put my finger on that. Formative years, and I try to encourage parents to really, really think about these years when children are in the home.
Yeah.
All the folks who make up that network for children and young people. And of course, we have some issues in the culture now that are of great concern, a lot of challenges and parental challenges and a lot of debate about various kinds of things. But it is worth noting in a podcast like this where you're looking at the joys of pastoral ministry, it really is worth the time to take the time with me or anyone else, that I think you'll interview Lance. And by the way, I'm very proud of the work you're doing with the podcast, but it's worth settling in and helping and allowing your guest, like me, who will be interviewed, to spend a little time. And I've given some, even yesterday, I spent some time thinking about family of origin stuff and home stuff. It's worthwhile. It's some of the, I had one of the professors years ago who said that he asked the question, do you bless your family roots? I said, what in the world is he talking about? He said, do you bless your family roots?
Yeah.
I had another Dr. Hester would say, let's start the course this way. Try to remember your first experience of helping someone. He challenged us to remember our first memory. What was your first memory? And I do know what my first memory was, reaching up to get a hold of the refrigerator door on an old General Electric refrigerator that we had in our home that lasted for a long, long time. Little almond-colored refrigerator, reaching as high as I could, and I could reach the bottom of the handle. It was like a U-handle on the door.
Oh, yeah.
That was my earliest memory. And then working through what was my...
But he asked what was your earliest memory of helping. Did you remember that one too?
And that's the next thing that I had to work with. And it was more like second grade that I would pinpoint. And then amazing to consider that and think about those simple things that are part of your journey that took place at such a young age. I think it's hard for us to overemphasize as a pastor or any leader in any setting where you're teaching or helping folks grow. Those formative years.
Well, you got
family of origin.
Your degree was in what'd you get your doctorate in?
Well, we spent a lot of time with family stuff. The underpinnings of my doctorate was family systems.
Okay, yeah.
And then the specific application of it that was a project that had to do with parents. So I had about 12 parents involved in a particular project, was implemented, and took them through a series of challenges to implement.
Well, I just know you do a lot of biblical counseling. Yeah.
The challenge was to help them implement, to be a catalyst for them implementing in their homes at least a family worship once a week.
Yeah.
That was the challenge.
Yeah.
And of course, the major discovery was that parents do very well, generally, if they're challenged and equipped, but if there's accountability. But the 3-month post findings were that after 3 towards 6 months, without the accountability piece, without the other parents helping hold them accountable, it was hard for them to really maintain a regular weekly family worship.
Who was holding accountable? Was it the other parents or was it? Okay.
That's the piece of the project that I had not implemented was follow-up.
Yeah.
The follow-up's a big deal with parents, Christian parents or unbelievers. And, of course, so it is on our journey as individual disciples. That's the case. But I think one of the big factors in related to the joys of pastoral ministry is that it's placed deep inside of you, out of your family of origin, that ministry could be a trap for the lazy or a trap for the workaholic. And that comes out of your deep, deep roots. And my mom and dad worked. And when I got done working, they worked some more. Yeah. And they expected us to work and then work some more. And that's, of course, what we do. Therefore, I bring to the table
A good work
in
ethic.
ministry, a good work ethic, but an unhealthy work ethic because technically I have been a workaholic.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the Lord is delivering me from that,
Mm-hmm.
but He's
Still.
been patient with me a long time. But others suffer. Others suffer when we allow like an acceptable. It's kind of like an acceptable vice to be a workaholic. Oh, that's not so bad.
Yeah.
That's not like other addictions that are so destructive. But
They don't realize that it's like destroying the family,
Yeah.
destroying the household.
It is,
Yeah.
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 and though I bless my family roots, and I bless the fact that my parents taught me to work.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to accomplish something or you want to have something, you get out there and get it. And that's what my dad would say. And I bless that. And I'm very grateful for that. But at the same time, we work to live.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We don't live to work.
Yeah. Amen. Yeah.
And I've struggled with that. And years ago, I would say, when I was a young man, I'd say, "Oh my goodness, I've always been hyperactive. I'll rest when I get old. I'll take a nap when I get in my 60s." Well, I'm there now, and I've had some health problems. I'm 63. Yeah,
I keep forgetting that.
Yeah, I know. I just seem so young.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, yeah. I thought you'd made at least made it to 45.
It's hard when you're young. You feel young, and you're good looking, and you just,
Yeah.
what are you going to do? But,
I will affirm what you were saying because you recommended a guy for me to go see, and one of the first things that we talked about, pretty much 80% of the stuff we talked about had to do with me, my lifestyle in the past. Like what was kind of the root of what was going on. And he just wanted to know about my family, wanted to know about our history, wanted to know what was going on, and it had to stem with some stuff that I dealt with way back when.
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And it was just healthy just to sit down and talk about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's truth in that. Yeah. You can do that, dig around, scratch around. And, we when we did emotional family of origin therapy, we call it. It was very, very emotional. And it was just, I remember being in our small group of 3 of us that did the mutual accountability thing, and we would sweat. All of us would be like, have sweat running down the side of our face in a cool classroom setting. And very emotional to take that heavy, hard stuff out and hold it and look at it and analyze and then stick it back in.
Yeah.
And so to speak. But it was really worthwhile. And out of that, I still contend that if we take time to really examine back there, we don't live there, we don't dwell there, but to examine and analyze our origins, those people who influence us in our especially formative years. If we do that, we know ourselves better.
Yeah.
More deeply, and the more we know ourselves, the more we get to know ourselves, and just be honest with ourselves and with God, we are able to minister to others. That was it was quite a, after all these years, that was a very healthy thing for me to go through that process. It would be hard to overemphasize that as I think about the joys of pastoral ministry.
Yeah.
It would be hard to overemphasize how that the platform for ministry is really set in those early years. Even think about things that we even growing up, things we did, like my brother and I. We did, and some of the folks my age won't remember this, but Bazooka Bubblegum. I guess they're still around, but Bazooka Bubblegum had a contest or a thing where if you bought their bubblegum, it was wrapped, and it had a little cartoon inside the wrappings of it. It was a square piece of gum about 1 inch by 1/2 inch. And it was just, we'd take the wrappers off, we'd read little cartoons in there. And if you saved those things, the wrappers off those, you could, a certain amount of them you could mail into the Bazooka Bubblegum Company, and you could get a Barlow pocket knife.
Oh,
and
well, hello.
That's what me and my brother Gene did. And of course, we were real close growing up because we were close in age. Did lots of things together. Anyway, long story short, we did send in enough wrappers. I think it was like 40 wrappers. We mailed them into the company.
So that's 40 individual sticks of gum you had to buy?
Yeah, 40
Okay.
pieces of
Yeah.
bubble gum.
Yeah.
Yeah. And at that time, it was probably a half cent per,
Okay.
per piece in that range. Anyway, we sent them in and waited. We go to the mailbox, and for a whole week, was there at the mailbox every day. So after about a week, we were like, okay, these things aren't coming. But about 4 or 5 weeks later, we went to the mailbox, and voila, there they were. We were thrilled,
Hmm.
absolutely thrilled with the fact that we
Now,
successfully had a Barlow pocket knife each.
Okay, each.
Mine was
So,
brown and his was
okay.
black.
Okay.
And
So y'all didn't like collaborative. Let's get. I was about to say that it probably
no.
wouldn't take as long,
This-
but
That's my first pocket knife
Wow.
ever. So
Barlow pocket
thrilled with those pocket knives. And
From
our
Bazooka
dad was thrilled
bubble
too
gum.
because
Hmm.
that was our weed eater. We didn't have a weed eater. So
oh,
Dad
Yeah.
said, "You guys get the yard cleaned up. Clean up around these trees, and I'll do some more and stuff." And so we took our Barlow pocket knives and we held them between our index finger and our thumb,
Mhm.
and we weed eated around the trees
wow.
and made things look good.
Mm.
And so
Now they have
it was a lot like
weed
work.
eater spray.
No. They have lots of means for doing that kind of thing. But that's a shaping thing.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
That's a lifelong shaping
Mm.
thing. So, I'm grateful for that. And I got to, as I tell you sometimes,
Yeah.
I got so many stories
Mhm.
now. It's like, oh my goodness, just stories, and good and bad and
Mm.
ugly.
Yeah.
But I do thank God for I never went to bed hungry. As you think about your family roots, I don't know what that would be like.
Mm.
I had some disappointments in childhood with some individuals who had some struggles in different ways. But great influence. My dad played the guitar a little bit,
Mm.
and he called it making music.
Yeah.
And he had some buddies who loved to make music, and they'd like to sip one
Mm.
sometimes.
Okay.
And I looked forward to those times when my dad would play the guitar. It was a relaxed time. We weren't working. It was
Mhm.
actually kind
Yeah.
of fun.
Yeah.
And so his buddies, who also were kind of musicians, they liked to have a cold one. And my mom liked the music, but sometimes the cold ones, maybe too many cold ones
Mhm.
in one music session.
Yeah.
But during those years, my dad showed me a few chords on the guitar and whet my appetite, but I was so hyper, I could not stay still long enough
Couldn't
to really
sit
stay with
with
it
it.
long. I
Okay.
did learn a few
Yeah.
chords and that kind of thing. But I did learn to clog.
Has
I
Greg
have-
not tried to get you to
well,
play guitar here yet?
I played a song one time here.
Did you? Really?
And
Okay.
he said the other day that he thought, you know about Greg, our
Yeah,
worship
yeah.
pastor,
Mhm.
yeah. He said he thought that was pretty good. Sherry and I did a song one time, one that I had written, and she and I did together. Anyway, it's just interesting to think about all those influences and
Mm.
impacting,
Yeah.
and the impact of that years later. The music making part of childhood. In fact, fiddlers conventions. Are you familiar with what fiddlers conventions are?
I'm guessing it's a convention for fiddlers.
They still have them occasionally, but many years ago when I was a child, say 9, 10, in fact, I saw my first real fist fight at a fiddlers convention. That's another story
Oh,
for another
yeah.
time.
Hmm.
But my dad loved fiddlers convention. He loved good music and bluegrass particularly, guitar, banjo stuff. So local schools would have fiddlers conventions where they invited local musicians to come in and play instruments, bands, groups, singles, soloists, and that kind of thing. And we looked forward to those. He'd say, "We're going to the fiddlers convention now," like on a Saturday night, and it was sort of a seasonal thing. I believe fall of the year. But anyway, I look forward to those because my dad knew I liked to clog or kick my feet,
Mhm.
and he'd get in the back rooms where the groups were rehearsing to go out on stage because they were competing against other bands there'd be a little prize money and trophies. Anyway, some of the guys would be playing, and he'd say, "Go ahead and kick it off," and I'd kick around, and I think they call it clogging. I think what I was doing was clogging. Anyway, that was a unique experience. They would throw dollar bills at my feet, and the harder I would kick, I was probably 9 or 10 years old, the more dollar bills they would throw.
Yeah.
So I'd pick up a few dollar bills at Fiddler's Convention.
Okay.
But that's a real fun memory from growing up. I don't know what all that has to do with the joys of
What stuck out in your mind?
ministry.
Good story.
That sticks out in my mind. Yeah, and I'm getting older now, and I love to go down memory lane sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
These things are special.
So before we get into some specific joyous stories of ministry, I've had the pleasure of getting to know a lot of your family, including your kids. So share a little bit about your kids.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Sherry and I were married in 1982 and finished up our undergrad at Campbell. And we wanted to have children early on, decided to wait 5 years, and we did wait 5 years. And Travis was born in 87, so Travis is our oldest.
Mm.
Then Kenisha, her daughter, and then we had 2 other sons, Jared and Zeb.
Mm-hmm.
And they have been and are a great joy to us. God has just really, really blessed our children, and I give Sherry a lot of credit because I was a lot of years running back and forth to school and pastoring and long days and short nights, and she held the line at home, and I admire her for that. She helped raise kids. But Jared, Kenisha, Travis, Kenisha, Jared, and Zeb in that order.
I keep forgetting Travis is older than Kenisha.
Yeah, Travis is the oldest. Yeah, so from 37 down to age 22, and I'm not too good with details. So
Wait, 22?
Yeah, Zeb's 22. Travis is 30.
Oh,
37 or
Zeb's
38.
22. Okay.
Yeah, but I guess that's one of the greatest joys of. We spend a lot of time in congregational leadership, and rightly so. God called us to His people to serve them, but I didn't realize until maybe more middle age, that a great legacy is what you pour into your children who are in your home, that you have the time with, and there have been times through the years when I would invest a large amount of time in individuals in the local church to a fault. I should have spent more time with my boys, my daughter. Sometimes they took second place to the congregational demands, and much of that was self-inflicted. But quite honestly, I could have done a lot better at home and spent more time with them. But God has really blessed them. Very grateful for them to be leaders in local churches, to be involved in missions and evangelism, leading and sharing for the cause of Christ, for the gospel. Brings me great joy. That would be near the top, if not the top, if you want to talk about the joys of ministry, because really, starts at home.
Starts at home.
Start at home.
And I know it's a little bit different with pastors because maybe I'm not trying to, guard you or anything, but or help your cause. But I know with a lot of jobs, you're able to go work 9 to 5, come home and let your hair down a little bit.
That's
but
right.
Pastoral ministry.
That's a good point, Wayne.
You're really not able to do that as much. Of course, I can't do that at all because I don't have any hair up top.
Yeah, I've noticed that.
Yeah.
We love you anyway.
Yeah, mine migrated, as some people like to say. But yeah, it's kind of like having a doctor or, somebody from the medical field. You really don't come home and do that. You see somebody on the side of the road, they're obligated to stop.
Sure.
If somebody calls you, and I'm sure you've taken calls at midnight earlier in the morning where you've had to been like, I got to go to the hospital or I got to go to this place and this place.
Right.
And so you really don't get to put your hair down too much. But
Sure.
Mm.
Yeah, it is a it's a 24/7, and even in a medical practice where you perhaps have a partnership.
Mm-hmm.
For many pastors, there's no practice where you're on call this week and your partner's on call the next weekend. It's not not that way. In most pastoral settings, the pastor is the individual person, even when there's additional staff.
Mm-hmm.
You still are pretty much on call, and
Yeah.
it can be a little bit like the dentist whose children has bad teeth. It's that's maybe a fair comparison.
Yeah.
If you're not careful, you can love on everybody and pour on everybody and pour into them and be there for them. And when you get home, you just fall down in a chair.
Mm-hmm.
You're exhausted. You're prayed out. Maybe you've had 50 prayers with 50 different people or 20 different groups that day, and so you don't want to. You don't feel you have the energy to say, "Okay, son, let's pray."
But
so
even in hearing the slight regret, saying I would have spent more time with my boys.
Yeah.
It's great encouragement knowing that as a pastor or even associate pastor, wanting to make sure that my first responsibility is at home.
That's right.
And this is all kind of secondary.
I agree with that. I sure do. Even Kanisha and I have a running joke now. She's like 36, I think. Beautiful, hardworking, great family, good husband. They're up south of D.C. serving in their church, and of course she's works in financial field, and he's in the Marines. But she and I have a kind of a running thing. When it gets near Christmas time, sometimes I'll say, "I'm thinking about it. I might get you a bicycle for Christmas." And she always grins, and she'll say, yeah, sure, because it was for several years. She had a little bicycle, and it was broke. And that thing sat there broke, and we once in a while would say, we need to fix that bicycle. And years passed. I never did fix that bicycle. And that's on me.
Oh, yeah.
She remembers that as a child.
So now it's just more like a joke.
And I remember that as a child. But down inside, I think,
should have fixed that bicycle.
I should have fixed that bicycle. I should have let something else go. But I was consumed with, saving the world, so to speak. And it's a fine line, and that's one of the greatest challenges. And it is a joy being in ministry and following the Lord's call. But it's a great challenge to find that balance. Just finding the balance. Time with your family, time, the congregation, and knowing when to say no.
Yeah.
And with workaholic tendencies, I have trouble saying no sometimes.
I know for finding that balance, great communication with your spouse.
Yes.
And having her as somebody, just having that open line of communication with her, for even her to say, hey, you're doing really well at your job or doing really well at ministry at the church, but it's time for you to minister here and be a leader here.
That's right. That's right.
Because my wife's corrected me on that once or twice.
Yeah. Well, you can rest assured, Sherry and I have been, we're approaching 42 years. The 43 actually in March. No, let me get the math right on that, because this is 2004. It'll be 42 years, March the 20th, because we were married in 82. Yeah. But Eddie Thompson, the state convention, I think he may be retired now from the state convention, but as a consultant, as he counseled pastors and husbands and wives in ministry leadership, he asked that question, or prompt our wives who asked us the question, or prompt pastors to ask their wives the question. Let me say that way. That's the way he asked it. Am I taking care of you? Am I
for pastors to ask to their wife?
To say to your wife, am I taking care of you? And you can really get an eye opener as a husband if you ask your wife, am I taking care of you? And to hear the responses of some of the wives, and sometimes they make the distinction, well, before we were in ministry, you rated maybe a 8 on the scale of taking care of me. But since we've been in ministry, maybe a 4. And to hear
Wow.
those kinds of things. And, Eddie Thompson, very, very smart fella. He's got a lot of years of experience and has helped a ton of us, pastors and ministers in that area. But yeah, finding that balance. And he some years ago was doing a retreat called Pastor's Juggling Act. And I think he may still be doing similar conferences, but good stuff. And it's a little bit like that, juggling. If you're not careful, a little bit like spinning plates.
Yeah.
You know, you spin this plate, and you're over here and spin this one. In the meantime, one.
Which is bad
One
because I
does.
can't do either one of those.
I can't either. Yeah, I can't either.
So let's talk about your ministry here at Robbins. And I think, hang on, let me just check.
Yeah.
Yeah. We may have to wrap it up rather soon, but talk about your ministry here, what brought you to... no, hang on. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about your call to ministry.
Oh,
Are you okay talking about
Yeah,
that?
that's fine.
Yeah. Let's talk
Sure.
about your calling to ministry and what
Right.
that looked like.
Sure. Well, the call to ministry, it's kind of, for me, it was kind of a painful ride. The Lord brought Sherry into my life. Of course, she's been the key disciple person in my life. Jesus saved my soul, and he used her to save my life. Because I'm impulsive. Years ago, really impulsive, very hyper, and she just helped settle me in the faith. And her roots were deep in Jesus, very deep in Jesus when I met her. At age 6, she began to pray for the husband she would marry, and she would say to the Lord every day, please send me someone who will, at age 6 now, send me a man who will love me, be faithful to me. All that there was an extended family crisis that prompted her to pray in that fashion. And so her roots were deep in Jesus already. What did you ask me? I get to think about Sherry and I get distracted.
Let's talk about your calling to ministry.
Yeah. So she's a key person in that. In fact, at age, I was saved when I was 16, Union Grove Baptist Church. The guys invited me, hey, Ken, they call me Ken, play ball with us, be on the church team, but you got to come to church 2 Sundays a month. I'm like, cool, I can do that, because I know they eat at least twice, and I'll choose the times when they're eating. And I'll go. But sure enough, I got there and I heard the gospel. And I love playing ball anyway, but I would hear the gospel. Reverend Bud Gillett would teach, and his wife would disciple. And it was very good for us. It deepened us. Well, Sherry and I were married in '82, and we, even before we married, and I think I was maybe about 18 years old at the time, she said, I really believe you're going to be a pastor sometime. And I said, woman, you're crazy. I will never be a pastor. And that's why I say never, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, we were married in '82. I was 21, she was age 18, and we got more active in the church. Some of my teenage years, I had one foot in the world, one foot in the church.
Right.
And didn't really, I don't think really settled to be faithful to God and let him really be Lord of my life until we were married in '82. And she just challenged me. And I didn't really think very highly of myself. And she would say, you can do anything, and God can use you, and God's got a good plan, and he can put it all together, and that kind of thing. And challenged me to go back to school. So we started back to school. My first problem when I started to RCC at Randolph Community College was my first problem in math class. I was doing developmental classes to catch up where I'd been slothful in high school. It was 5 plus 7. I remember that 5 plus 7 equals 12. And that's where I started from. I started back to school
in college.
83 in college. And so I had a lot of catching up to do. Nonetheless, as we became active in the church, we were working third shift in textiles. We were riding together and spending a lot of time together at work and home, back and forth. Then we're on the missions committee and serving as a deacon and getting really deeply involved in the church. And then they said, would you be willing to teach Sunday school? And I said, oh, my, no way. I can't teach Sunday school. I'm scared to death. I have a fear of speaking in front of people. And Sherry, once again, would say, well, sure you can. The Lord will help you. He can use you. And one day she said to me, she said, if you don't teach Sunday school, who's gonna teach those boys? It was a 10 and 11-year-old boys Sunday school class.
Yeah.
And I was the assistant, so I didn't have to teach every Sunday. But I tell you what, that was monumental for me.
Yeah.
When I committed to teach, I started digging in the Word.
Oh, yeah.
I digged because I had to dig in.
Mm-hmm.
And I was nervous. I would have diarrhea. Sometimes I'd want to throw up on Sunday mornings. Sometimes I'd leave those boys sitting there, 4 or 5 of them, the other teacher in the class, say, I'll be right back. Go to the bathroom, use the bathroom, come back to class. Did it many times. Just afraid, fearful, anxious.
Yeah.
It was just hard for me. But God was honored in that. One Sunday morning, I was preparing real early in the morning in the Seagrove where we were living, in the home place there that we bought when we first were married. And I always studied in the dining room, and I had my Bible open in the book of Acts, and where the man from Macedonia was motioning to Paul to come over to help them. And it just as clear as it could be in my heart, I knew that was for me. And the Lord said, it's for you. Come over and help. And from that point on, I began to, it was a turning point. I began to analyze, and every time I was around a pastor or someone in ministry, I'd start throwing the questions to them, and I'd say, or can we go get lunch or something? I was just questioning, just wearing people out. On the inside, I was turning upside down. Yeah. Kept praying and seeking the Lord, and in time, just it was more solidified day by day that God wanted me to obey Him in ministry. I call it vocational ministry, but we know that call it ministry. That's for every believer. Yeah. But sometimes I call it vocational ministry. And Sherry affirmed and supported me all the way. Was just so supportive.
Did I ever share with you my ministry call? It's very, very similar.
Really?
Yeah. Well, just in the fact I didn't want to do it because I knew it involved some type of public speaking. So, like, the fear of public speaking was very real. I just assumed go out in the road and get hit by a bus.
Tell me about it.
Yeah, didn't want to do it. And even then, I think every time that you've asked me to speak, I still just end up getting nervous. I know I'm well prepped. I prepped throughout the week, but didn't want to do it. I was going through the book. No, we were going through. It was a D-Now conference in college. It was my freshman year of college, and the year prior to that, when I was serving as a high school senior in the youth ministry, I was teaching a bunch. And I remember the pastor there was Dr. Tony Latham. Okay. And it was right after Sunday school, and he was in there cleaning up some of his stuff, and he said, hey, Lance, I want you to give me a call when you go into ministry. And I said, well, you're going to be waiting a while, because that ain't going to happen. And then we were on a D-Now my freshman year of college, was in an unknown church. I don't even remember. I think it was in Owensboro, Kentucky, but I don't remember the name of the church. I thought I was coming as an aide, somebody to wrangle students, and they separated us, and I was by myself. And we were going over the end of Moses into Joshua, and how Joshua was just there. Yeah. And I was in the upstairs room of somebody's random house, and I was like, he's calling me to ministry. And that's what I did. I surrendered call ministry right there. Yeah, so similar, kind of similar story.
Yeah, that's
there.
Interesting. Yeah, I haven't heard you describe it.
Yeah, didn't want to do it. Didn't want to do it.
Sure. Yeah. And years ago, I would hear men say, and men of God say, well, if you can do anything else, do it.
Yeah.
If God wants, it's kind, and that's an interesting thought. I don't know if I fully agree with that, but it's still worth thinking about.
I had a mentor that did the same thing to me. He was trying to talk me out of it. He was, but I think it was only like the first 1 or 2 times we met, and then he understood. It's like, I don't see myself doing anything else. It's the only thing I'm going to do.
I still believe that. The call to ministry really is a call to ministry. I don't. I hear some folks talk about, I chose to, go into vocational ministry, and I really believe that really is more of God. I do. Yeah. I still believe it's a sacred thing, and I think it's not. It's just not something you can say, well, okay, I think I'll do
this is what I want to do.
That wasn't my journey. I can tell you that. And it's not. I'm doing this because I'm good at it, or I'm doing this because I'm qualified. Though, God gifts us.
Most
and He
of my
shapes us
mentors
for-
are in that same kind of area to an extent that they weren't really looking at going into ministry, and it was more of the Holy Spirit prompting them and pushing them,
Sure.
them being kind of put in positions of leadership, not that they would ever.
If I didn't know that it was a God thing,
Yeah.
I can assure you I would not have made it
Yeah,
these
yeah,
years. And when you hit the low spots, and there's a lot of joys, but there are some low spots.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes more than we would like to admit.
Yeah.
But in those times, if it weren't for knowing that,
Mm.
this is a God thing.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
an eternal thing. This is a kingdom thing.
It is.
I'll stand before God one day and I'll give an account.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do with what I gifted you and called you to do?
Yeah.
And that's as
There
real
was-
as I know it can be.
There was a guy here that I was trying to push into just teaching a
Yeah.
little bit, and he says, God's not called me to do that.
Right.
He was just so, he was like, pointed me to the verse where it was like, they'll be judged with a greater strictness. And he says, I don't believe God's calling me to teach right now.
Yeah.
He said, maybe later on. He says, but
Right.
that's not for me.
Yeah.
And so,
It's a
Yeah.
it's a sobering thing.
Yeah.
Very serious thing.
so we've got to wrap up. Our time has expired.
Yeah.
And so the last thing that I want to do is talk about book recommendations that you might have. Do you have any? If you don't, I've got several.
You go ahead and do
Yeah.
yours.
Okay.
I thought you might ask about that, and I can give you one.
Okay, give me one.
I'll give you one that's not. It's one that helped change and help me after these years in ministry
Okay.
that I would highly recommend. And I've got many, but the one that comes to mind that may help many who are a little older like me in ministry is by Wayne Cordero,
Okay.
Leading on Empty.
Ooh.
Leading on Empty by Wayne Cordero.
Yeah.
That is the resource that helped me to know that I could take a sabbatical.
Oh,
I
yeah.
could never give myself permission for all these years, though I was very, very tired.
Mm-hmm.
Never burn out, but I was on the way to burn out. And I was pastoring here
Mm-hmm.
at the time. But his book, I spent a week in Houston with Sherry. She was at a conference, and I spent the whole week in that resource, read and reread, and time in the Word, and time seeking God.
Mm-hmm.
And when I came away from that trip to Houston, it was monumental.
Mm.
And he shares about his own journey,
Yeah.
which is very helpful
Wow.
as well. Anyway, Wayne Cordero,
Okay.
Leading on Empty.
Okay, so I've got two. One is for our members, because this is our first podcast, and this is
Mhm.
about joys of ministry. And you said that we needed some humor in our life, so I was like,
We do.
I gotta bring this one out. Okay, so this one is called "How to Be a Perfect Christian."
I haven't read that.
Yeah, it's by the Babylonian Bee. It is. It's quite humorous. It's just satire pieces, all that is, because we know that a perfect Christian doesn't exist. At least we don't believe that here. And then this one's called "The Pastor's Soul," the call and care of an under shepherd. And so when we talk about being under shepherds or pastors, people in ministry, just deciphering that call, that book's very, very practical about how to lead the flock well, and kind of deciphering your call a little bit. So anyway, thank you for coming. We may have to do a part two.
Yeah, let's do a part two.
Yeah, let's do a
And
part two.
we're going to do some funny stuff one of these days, because
Yeah.
that's one of the challenges of ministry. It is joyful, but
Yeah.
I appreciate my brothers that I get to laugh with.
Yeah.
And it's we have a different kind of humor in ministry
Yeah. Mhm.
that is good for us. Let me throw one more book out there, and
Oh,
I
yeah,
know you're
yeah.
trying to close out. But as a young man, there's a resource entitled "Out of the Salt Shaker and Into the Earth"
You got some really cool titles.
by Rebecca Pippert.
Okay.
And I read that as I was about age 22, 23. That's a life-changing
Yeah.
resource as it relates to not only your call, but that everyone, whether you consider yourself in vocational ministry or not, we're called to be salt and light.
Amen.
And
Yep.
that every minister, every Christian is a believer, is a minister. Well, I'm a bit of a motor mouth, so I'm
Yeah.
going to let you close it
All
out
right.
there, brother.
Well, yeah, we're just going to sign off. And so thank you for being a part of
My
our
pleasure.
first podcast. We'll come back on. We'll do it again at some point. Hopefully next week you guys will hear from our other pastor, Pastor Greg Pilson, the Dr. Swiss Army Knife, whatever you want to call him. It'll be fun. So anyway, hope you
He's a
guys
good
have
one.
a blessed and Jesus-filled day. And we'll catch you next